The smell of solder and oil filled the cramped workshop tucked between a food distributor and a fuel depot on Station Providore. Dennis Clark wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days and examined the small mechanical bird in his palm. Its wings were bent, its internal gears stripped from years of a child playing too rough. He smiled anyway. This one needs a new spring, he muttered to himself, reaching for his collection of salvage parts. The bin overflowed with screws, wires, and components he had pulled from discarded electronics over the years. Nothing went to waste in his shop. The door chimed and a Quillen parent entered, their forearms cradling a sobbing child. The young one clutched a stuffed creature that leaked synthetic filling from a torn seam. "Mr. Clark, can you help?" Bix won't stop crying. Dennis set down the mechanical bird and gestured them closer. "Let me see what we have here." The child, small and covered in soft gray fur, held out the damaged toy with trembling hands. Dennis took it gently and examined the tear. Simple enough. He pulled out a curved needle and thread that matched the fabric almost perfectly. "This will take maybe 10 minutes. You want to watch?" Bix nodded, eyes wide. Dennis worked slowly, narrating each step so the child could see how the torn edges came back together. The Quillen parent shifted nervously. "How much will this cost?" "For a kid's toy." Dennis shook his head. "Nothing. Never charge for these." The parent's facial tendrils twitched in confusion. "But you must eat. You must pay for your space on the station. I fix other things for credits. Adult stuff. But toys." He tied off the final stitch and handed the stuffed creature back to Bix. Kids should never have to go without something that makes them happy. The child squeezed the toy tight, and the crying stopped immediately. The parent still looked baffled but placed a hand over their chest in thanks before leaving. Dennis returned to the mechanical bird. This was his 5th toy repair today, and the sun cycle was only half over. Station Providore attracted travelers from 100 different worlds, and every species had children. Every child had toys that broke, and somehow, word had spread that the human in the corner shop would fix them for free. Most aliens on the station gave him a wide berth otherwise. Humans had a reputation. Deathworlders, they called his kind. Creatures from a planet so hostile that survival required violence bred into every cell. The galaxy knew humans as soldiers, mercenaries, and traitors too stubborn to know what to quit. They expected aggression and got confused when Dennis offered kindness instead, that he didn't mind the distance. The work was enough. Hours passed in peaceful silence, broken only by the sounds of his tools. He replaced the spring in the mechanical bird, calibrated its wing servos, and added a drop of lubricant to each joint. When he pressed the activation button, it chirped and fluttered its wings perfectly. "Good as new," he said, setting it aside for pickup tomorrow. The door chimed again. Dennis looked up to see 2 station security officers in their gray uniforms. One was Rella, a tall being with crystalline skin who had brought him broken toys before. The other he didn't recognize. "Dennis, we need your help with something unusual," Rella said. "What kind of unusual?" "The kind where we don't know what else to do." She gestured, and the second officer wheeled in a cargo container about the size of a small desk. "Customs seized this from a smuggler's ship 3 days ago. The smuggler died in transit, and we've been trying to figure out what to do with the contents." Dennis approached the container. It had air holes drilled in the top and sides. "What's inside?" "Living cargo. 6 of them. Barely alive when we found them." Rella unsealed the container and lifted the lid. Dennis looked inside, and his breath caught .6 small creatures lay curled together on a bed of shredded packing material. They looked almost like miniature dragons from Earth legends, with scales that might have been beautiful if they weren't so dull and lifeless. Each one was small enough to fit in his palm. Their sides moved with shallow breaths. "What are they?" "Dravix hatchlings. From a quarantined world halfway across the sector. Someone stole them from a nesting site and tried to sell them as exotic pets." Dennis reached into the container slowly. One of the hatchlings stirred at his touch, letting out a weak sound that was part chirp, part whimper. Its skin felt cold. "They need heat. They need food. They need to be euthanized," the second officer interrupted. "Station policy is clear. Dangerous fauna from restricted worlds cannot be kept here. We're required to terminate them humanely." Dennis pulled his hand back and stared at the officer. These are babies. These are apex predators that will grow to 15 feet tall and breathe plasma hot enough to melt hull plating. The officer replied. The compassionate thing is to end it quickly. The compassionate thing is to try saving them first. Rella's crystalline features softened. Dennis, even if we wanted to, no one on this station knows how to care for Dravik's young. Their biology is completely unknown. They'll die anyway, just slower and in more pain. Dennis looked back at the container. 6 tiny lives that had already suffered so much. Stolen from their home, stuffed in a box, left to starve in the dark while their captor died. Nobody wanted them. Nobody except the human who fixed broken toys. I'll take them, he said. What? Give me the container. I'll figure it out. The second officer laughed. You're a repair technician, not a xenobiologist. I fix broken things. That's what I do. Dennis met Rella's eyes. Please, just give me a chance. Rella looked at her partner, then back at Dennis. She had watched him repair her daughter's learning tablet for free last month, had seen the care he put into every damaged toy that crossed his workbench. Finally, she nodded. You have 10 days. After that, station compliance will require us to follow protocol. 10 days is enough. The officers left the container and departed. Dennis sealed his shop door and carried the box to his workbench. He cleared the space and lifted each hatchling out carefully, examining them under his best light. Dehydrated, malnourished, cold, but alive. All right, he whispered. Let's see what I can fix. He had 10 days to save 6 lives. The same way he had spent years trying to fix broken toys, hoping that if he put enough shattered things back together, maybe it would make up for the one thing he had failed to save. Dennis got to work. Dennis had not slept in 48 hours and his hands trembled as he mixed another batch of nutrient paste. The 6 hatchlings lay under the heat lamps he had rigged from spare parts, their breathing slightly stronger than 2 days ago, but still far too shallow. He had turned his entire workshop into a makeshift nursery. The repair benches were pushed against the walls, and the center of the room now held a padded enclosure surrounded by monitoring equipment he had borrowed, begged, and in one case, quietly stolen from the station's medical bay. Nobody had questioned the human who looked like death himself wandering the corridors at odd hours. The smallest hatchling, the one he had started calling Whisper because it barely made any sound, opened its eyes as he approached. They were dark and glassy, but aware. That was progress. Hey there, little one. Time to eat. He filled an eyedropper with the paste he had developed through trial and error. The station's database had nothing on Dravik's nutritional needs, so he had worked backward from what he knew about Earth reptiles and birds. High protein, calcium supplements, and electrolytes to counter the dehydration. It was guesswork that could kill them, but doing nothing would kill them faster. Whisper opened its mouth and accepted the drops. Swallowed. Accepted more. The other 5 stirred and began chirping softly. Dennis moved between them, feeding each one with infinite patience. This was the 14th feeding cycle since he had taken them in. His door chimed. Dennis ignored it. The chime repeated, more insistent. I'm busy, he called out. Mr. Clark, this is Station Administrator Vin. Open the door. Dennis sighed and sealed the enclosure before shuffling to the entrance. The administrator stood in the corridor with a datapad and an expression that suggested displeasure. Vin was a Korean, tall and thin with skin that shifted between blue and purple depending on mood. Right now, it was definitely leaning purple. You missed the compliance meeting this morning. I told Rella I was taking care of them. That doesn't exempt you from station regulations. Vin pushed past him and stopped when he saw the workshop. What is all this? Keeping them alive. The administrator approached the enclosure and studied the hatchlings. You've actually stabilized them. I didn't think it was possible. They're tougher than they look. Dennis rubbed his eyes, fighting back exhaustion. Another week, and they should be strong enough to 10 days, Mr. Clark. That was the agreement. You have 8 days remaining, and then these creatures must be euthanized or removed from the station. They're babies. Give me more time. They're illegal fauna from a restricted world. Ven's skin darkened further. Do you understand the political complications if the Galactic Council discovers we're harboring Dravik specimens? Their entire planet is under quarantine for a reason. Because adult Draviks are dangerous. These aren't adults. They will be. In 5 years, they'll be large enough to tear through hull plating. In 10 years, they'll be apex predators that most species would classify as living weapons. Vin pointed at the enclosure. Saving them now just delays the inevitable problem. Dennis crossed his arms. So, your solution is to kill children because they might be dangerous someday? My solution is to follow the law and avoid a diplomatic incident. The administrator's voice softened slightly. I understand your compassion. Humans are known for that, even if your reputation suggests otherwise. But sometimes kindness causes more harm than good. After Vin left, Dennis returned to the enclosure. The hatchlings had settled in his sleep, their scales rising and falling with steady breaths. He had rigged a simple camera system to monitor them during feeding cycles, and reviewing the footage had shown him something interesting. They responded to his voice. When he spoke, even from across the room, their heart rates stabilized. When he was silent, they grew agitated. It reminded him of studies he had read about Earth animals bonding with caretakers, but this seemed stronger, more deliberate. On the third night, Dennis sat beside the enclosure and talked to them the way he used to talk to his daughter. He told them about Earth, about his old life before the accident, about why he had run to the furthest edge of known space to fix broken toys for alien children. I couldn't save her, he whispered. She was only 6. The transport crash happened so fast. I was right there and I couldn't do anything. His voice cracked. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Fixing things. Making kids smile. But it doesn't bring her back. He looked at the 6 tiny shapes under the heat lamps. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to save you. What if I fail again? Movement caught his eye. Whisper, the smallest one, had crawled to the edge of the enclosure closest to him. Its dark eyes were open and focused directly on his face. Then it spoke. You already saved us. Dennis jerked backward, his exhausted brain trying to process what he had just heard. The voice was small, uncertain, but undeniably real. You can talk. The other 5 hatchlings raised their heads. Whisper continued, forming words carefully as if tasting them for the first time. We understand. We listen. Station broadcasts, voices, words. We learn. How long have you been able to speak? Since waking. But you seemed sad. We stayed quiet. Dennis stared at them, his mind racing. Sentient. They were fully sentient. Not animals at all, but children in the truest sense. Children who had been listening to his confessions, his fears, his grief. One of the others, a hatchling with slightly brighter scales, spoke next. You fix toys for free because you miss your daughter? Yes. We miss our mothers too. They didn't protect us. Bad people took us. The hatchling's voice held an edge of old fear. Dark box. Cold. Hungry. Thought we would die. Another one, this one with a patch of white scales on its chest, added, you gave warmth, gave food, gave safe place. We just need you to stay. Whisper finished. Dennis felt something break loose in his chest, some wall he had built after his daughter's death. These weren't just creatures he was trying to save out of guilt or obligation. They were people. Small, scared people who had been abandoned and hurt and left to die in the dark. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. The hatchlings chirped softly, a sound of contentment, and settled back into sleep. Dennis sat there for a long time, watching them breathe, understanding that everything had changed. The door chimed again at dawn. This time it was Rella, the security officer, and she looked worried. Dennis, we have a problem. The station received a formal termination order from the Galactic Council. The hatchlings are scheduled for euthanization in 6 days. They can speak, Rella. They're sentient. I believe you, but the law doesn't care. Draviks are classified as dangerous fauna regardless of intelligence level. She handed him a datapad. I'm sorry. I tried to delay it, but Administrator Vin filed the paperwork immediately. Dennis looked at the termination order, then at the enclosure where 6 small voices had spoken to him in the dark. 6 children who needed him, who trusted him. No, he said simply. What? I'm not letting them kill my kids. Rella's crystalline features shifted in surprise. Dennis, you can't claim guardianship of an endangered species. Watch me. He had 8 days to figure out how to protect them. 8 days to become something more than the human who fixed broken toys. 8 days to prove that some things were worth fighting for, even against the entire galaxy. Dennis got back to work. The hatchlings were growing stronger by the day, and Dennis's workshop had transformed into something between a home and a classroom. He had taught them to stack blocks, to follow simple commands with their eyes, and to play gently with the spare parts he left scattered around their enclosure. They learned frighteningly fast. He had also named them properly, based on their emerging personalities. Patch, with the white scales, loved to help when Dennis worked on repairs. Spinner enjoyed turning in circles until she got dizzy. Bright was constantly exploring every corner of the enclosure. Whisper remained the quietest, but also the most observant. Tumble couldn't walk 3 steps without tripping over his own feet. And Grace moved with a natural elegance that made her seem older than the rest. They were sitting together now, watching Dennis repair a broken music player for a Quillen merchant. Grace's head tilted as the device began playing a soft melody. "Pretty sound," she said. "It's called music. Humans make a lot of it. You make music, not a long time." Dennis set the player aside. "My daughter used to sing. I'd play guitar, and she'd make up songs about whatever she saw that day. Flowers, birds, clouds." Bright crawled closer to the edge of the enclosure. "Tell us about her." So Dennis did. He told them about Rachel, about her laugh that sounded like bells, about how she would demand the same bedtime story 12 nights in a row until she had it memorized. The hatchlings listened with complete attention, their dark eyes never leaving his face. The door chimed, and a Corian woman entered. She wore the white uniform of the station's medical division and carried a scanning device. "Mr. Clark? I'm Dr. Shun. Administrator Venn requested I examine your charges." Dennis stood protectively near the enclosure. "They're healthy. I've been monitoring their vitals constantly. I'm not here to hurt them. I'm here because Venn is covering all bases before the termination date." She approached slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. "May I?" Dennis nodded and opened the enclosure. Dr. Shun ran her scanner over each hatchling, making notes on her datapad. The 6 of them sat perfectly still, understanding this was important. "Remarkable," she murmured. "Their recovery is extraordinary. All metabolic functions are within normal ranges. No signs of permanent damage from the initial malnutrition." She looked at Dennis with something like wonder. "How did you know what to feed them?" "I guessed. Use what I know about Earth animals and hope for the best. You save their lives through guesswork and determination." She deactivated her scanner. "Mr. Clark, I need to tell you something. Dravik's hatchlings bond to one primary caregiver for life. It's an evolutionary trait that ensures protection during their vulnerable early years. Once that bond forms, separation causes severe psychological trauma, often fatal." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying these 6 have imprinted on you completely. Their brain scans show the formation of deep emotional attachment pathways. If you're separated from them now, they will die of grief within days, possibly hours." Dennis felt his stomach drop. "So I'm stuck with them?" "No." Dr. Shun smiled slightly. "They're stuck with you. Congratulations, you're a father to 6 Draviks." After she left, Dennis sat heavily on his workbench. The hatchlings had gone quiet, sensing his distress. Finally, Whisper spoke. "You don't want to be our father?" The pain in that small voice cut deeper than any knife. Dennis looked at them, at 6 pairs of eyes watching him with desperate hope and fragile trust. "It's not that simple. I'm human. You're Draviks. The galaxy has rules about this kind of thing." "We don't care about rules," Patch said. "You saved us. You fed us. You taught us. You tell us stories," Spinner added. "You're warm and safe." Tumble chimed in. Grace, always the leader, moved to the front. "We know you're scared. We're scared too. But we choose you, even if the galaxy says no." Bright nodded eagerly. "Are you our dad?" The question hung in the air. Dennis thought about his daughter, about the hole her death had left in his life. He thought about running to the edge of known space to escape his grief. He thought about fixing broken toys because he couldn't fix his broken heart. And he thought about 6 small creatures who had been stolen, abandoned, and left to die, who somehow still had the courage to ask for love. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm your dad." The hatchlings erupted in chirps and squeaks of joy, climbing over each other to get closer to him. Dennis opened the enclosure fully and let them swarm out, tiny claws gripping his shirt as they climbed on him. Patch settled into his pocket. Grace perched on his shoulder. The others found spots on his arms and lap. They stayed like that for a long time, a family formed from grief and hope and the stubborn human refusal to give up on broken things. The peace lasted exactly 2 hours. Administrator Van arrived with a compliance officer and a formal termination notice. "Mr. Clark, despite Dr. Shin's report, the Galactic Council's ruling stands. The hatchlings must be euthanized in 4 days." Dennis stood, the hatchlings clustering around his feet. "No, this isn't optional. These aren't animals. They're sentient children. My children. And I'm claiming guardianship under interspecies adoption protocols." Ven's skin flashed deep purple. "There are no protocols for adopting endangered fauna from quarantined worlds. What you're suggesting has no legal precedent. Then we'll make one. You can't fight the Galactic Council." Dennis looked down at 6 small faces watching him with absolute trust. "Watch me." The compliance officer stepped forward. "Mr. Clark, if you resist the termination order, you'll be arrested and the creatures will be seized by force. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Patch hissed, a tiny sound of defiance. The other hatchlings moved closer to Dennis, forming a protective circle around his legs. They were terrified but standing their ground. "You'll have to go through me first," Dennis said quietly. Vin sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." "Very well. I'm filing formal charges of unlawful possession of restricted fauna. You have 72 hours to present your case before a judicial hearing. If you cannot prove legal guardianship, the hatchlings will be terminated and you will be banned from the station." After they left, Dennis sat down hard. His hands were shaking. Grace climbed into his lap and pressed her small head against his chest. "We're sorry. We made trouble for you. You didn't make anything. I chose this." He stroked her scales gently. "And I'd choose it again." Whisper's quiet voice asked, "What do we do now?" Dennis had 72 hours to prove he deserved to keep them. 72 hours to fight against laws and bureaucracy and the fear that aliens had of Deathworlders raising apex predators. He had no legal experience, no political connections, and no idea how to win a case that had no precedent in galactic history. But he had fixed impossible things before. "Now," he said, gathering his children close, "we prepare to fight." And somewhere in the back of his mind, Dennis realized he had stopped running from his grief and started running towards something better. A second chance he never expected and didn't deserve, but would defend with everything he had. Because that's what fathers do. The judicial hearing was held in Station Providore's largest cargo bay, because the smaller conference rooms couldn't accommodate the crowd. Word had spread fast. A human claiming guardianship of Dravik's hatchlings was the kind of story that drew attention from every corner of the sector. Dennis stood at a simple table with the 6 hatchlings arranged carefully on its surface. He had cleaned them until their scales shimmered, and they sat in perfect formation the way he had practiced with them for 2 days straight. Behind him sat Dr. Shun and, surprisingly, the Quillen merchant whose child's toy he had repaired weeks ago. Across from him sat 3 judges from different species, their expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. Administrator Van occupied a witness chair to the side. And filling the observation area were hundreds of station residents who had come to watch. The head judge, a being with 4 eyes and silver skin, activated the recording system. "We are here to determine the legality of human Dennis Clark's claim of guardianship over 6 Dravik's hatchlings currently in his possession. Mr. Clark, do you understand the charges against you? Eat dough. Then present your case." Dennis had rehearsed this 100 times, but his mouth still went dry. Public speaking had never been his strength. He was better with his hands, better with broken things than with words. "Your Honors, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I fix things for a living. Toys mostly, but also data pads, communicators, anything people bring me." He gestured to the hatchlings. 3 weeks ago, station security brought me 6 dying babies and asked if I could fix them. So I tried. The creatures in question are classified as dangerous fauna, one judge interrupted. Your attempted aid, while perhaps well-intentioned, does not change their legal status. They're not fauna. They're people. The third judge leaned forward. Explain. Dennis nodded to Grace. She stood carefully and spoke in her clear, practiced voice. My name is Grace. These are my siblings, Patch, Spinner, Bright, Whisper, and Tumble. We understand language. We learn mathematics. We create stories. We feel fear, joy, sadness, love. She looked directly at the judges. We are not animals. We are children. The murmur that ran through the observation area was like wind through trees. The judges exchanged glances. Sentience alone does not override quarantine protocols, the silver-skinned judge said. Draviks are from a restricted world for security reasons. Dr. Shun stood. May I speak? You may. I've examined these hatchlings extensively. They've formed a complete psychological bond with Mr. Clark. Separation at this stage would cause cascade failure of their limbic systems. They would die, slowly and painfully, for what amounts to broken hearts. She pulled up a holographic display of brain scans. This is not opinion. This is medical fact. Then they should have been euthanized immediately before bonding could occur, Vince said from his chair. This situation only exists because Mr. Clark violated protocol. The Quillen merchant stood up from the audience. I wish to testify. The head judge looked surprised but nodded. The merchant approached the witness area, their forearms gesturing expressively. I am Quillen Merchant Yevon of the Trade Guild. I have done business on 40 stations across 12 sectors. I have met thousands of beings from hundreds of species. Yevon pointed at Dennis. This human is strange. He fixes toys for free. He refuses payment from children. When I questioned his business sense, he said something I will never forget. Kids should never have to go without something that makes them happy. Relevance? The judge asked. Humans have a reputation across the galaxy. Deathworlders. Aggressive. Dangerous. We fear them because they come from a planet that tries to kill them daily, and they refuse to die. Yevon's voice grew stronger. But we forget the other side of that coin. Humans protect fiercely because they know what it means to survive against impossible odds. This man doesn't abandon young. Any young. That is not weakness. That is strength we should celebrate, not punish. More murmurs from the crowd. Dennis saw several heads nodding. The judges conferred quietly for several minutes. Finally, the head judge spoke. Mr. Clark, the issue remains that you possess illegal fauna from a quarantine world. Even if we accept their sentience, even if we acknowledge the bond, galactic law is clear. They must be returned to their world of origin or destroyed. Their world is unreachable, Dennis argued. The quarantine has been partially lifted as of this morning. The cargo bay went silent. Dennis felt his blood turn to ice. The judge continued. A Dravik ship responded to our inquiry about the hatchlings. They are en route to Station Providor and will arrive in approximately 60 hours. The hatchlings will be returned to their people. Whisper made a small sound of distress. Tumble pressed against Dennis's hand. Patch's scales had gone pale. You're sending them back to the people who failed to protect them. Dennis's voice came out harder than he intended. To a society that lets smugglers steal them from their nest. We're returning them to their own species. Surely that is preferable to remaining with an alien caretaker. Grace stood again, her small body trembling. We don't want to go back. We want to stay with our father. Dravik's culture does not recognize the concept of individual parenthood. The judge explained, not unkindly. You will be raised by your community as is proper for your kind. We choose Dennis, Bright said. We choose to stay, Spinner added. All 6 hatchlings spoke together, their voices overlapping. We choose our father. The head judge raised a hand for silence. This hearing is recessed until the Dravik's arrival. At that time, the hatchlings will be transferred to their people's custody. Mr. Clark, you will be compensated for your care and time. I don't want compensation. I want my kids. That is not your decision to make. The gavel came down and the hearing ended. Dennis gathered the hatchlings carefully, ignoring the stares and whispers as he carried them back to his workshop. They were silent during the walk, understanding that something terrible was happening. Once inside, they finally broke. All six began crying, small chirping sounds mixed with very human-like sobs. Dennis held them, his own eyes burning. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have hidden you. Should have run. Not your fault. Grace managed between sobs. You fought for us. I lost. Whisper pressed close to his chest. 60 hours. That's how long we have together. Maybe less if the ship arrives early. They spent that night huddled together in the workshop, trying to memorize every moment. Dennis told them stories about Earth. They showed him the simple games they had invented. Patch helped him repair one last toy, a mechanical bird that sang when wound up as dawn broke over the station. Dennis realized he had never felt more helpless. He had fixed thousands of broken things, but he couldn't fix this. Couldn't repair the laws that would tear his family apart. Grace climbed onto his shoulder and whispered in his ear. When the Draviks come, will you fight? I don't know how. 6 judges said no. Galactic law says no. Even your own people say no. But do you want to fight? Dennis looked at each of them. 6 small faces that trusted him completely. 6 children who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. More than anything. Then we wait, Grace said. And we hope that when our people see what we've become, they'll understand. Dennis wasn't sure he believed that. But he held his children close and tried to pretend that 60 hours was enough time to say goodbye to everything that mattered. Outside, stars wheeled through the void as a Dravik ship cut through space toward Station Providore, carrying representatives of a species that had no concept of individual parenthood, coming to reclaim children who wanted nothing more than to stay with their father. The collision was inevitable, and Dennis had no idea how to survive it. The Dravik ship was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It hung in space near Station Providore like a sculpture carved from obsidian and fire, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to shift and breathe. Every species on the station who had a window facing that direction stopped to stare. Dennis stood in the docking bay with the 6 hatchlings clustered around his feet, trying not to show fear. The station had cleared the entire area except for essential personnel. Administrator Vin stood to one side with security forces. The 3 judges from the hearing occupied a raised platform, and scattered throughout were spectators who had begged, bribed, or threatened their way inside to witness this moment. The airlock cycled open and 3 Draviks stepped through. They were massive. Each stood at least 15 feet tall, their bodies covered in scales that shimmered like oil on water, shifting through colors that didn't quite exist in normal light. Their heads were angular and elegant, with crests of bone and crystal that caught the light like crowns. Wings folded against their backs suggested grace and power. Every movement radiated the confidence of apex predators who had never known fear. The hatchlings pressed against Dennis's legs, trembling. He understood why. These beings were their species, their people, but also utterly alien to children who had known only a human's gentle touch. The largest of the 3 Draviks stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice resonated like thunder filtered through music. I am Starwing, matriarch of the Burning Heights clan. We have come for our stolen young. Administrator Vin moved to greet her, but Dennis spoke first. They're not yours. Every eye in the bay turned to him. Starwing's attention focused like a laser, and Dennis felt the weight of it in his bones. He forced himself to stand straight. Explain yourself, small creature. My name is Dennis Clark. I'm their father. The 3 Draviks exchanged glances. The second one, slightly smaller but with darker scales, spoke. You are human. They're Draviks. This claim is nonsense. I saved their lives. I fed them, kept them warm, taught them. They chose me, and I chose them. That makes us family. Starwing moved closer, her massive form towering over Dennis. The hatchlings pressed harder against him, but didn't run. You dare stand before me and claim ownership of Dravik's young? You, whose species we barely tolerate in our sector of space. I don't claim ownership. I claim love. Love? The word came out like a hiss. What does a Deathworlder know of love? Your kind wages war across the stars. You conquer and consume and destroy. You are not capable of the bond you describe. Dennis felt anger flash through him. My species is capable of plenty you don't understand. including protecting those who can't protect themselves. The third Drax, whose scales held hints of blue, laughed. It was not a kind sound. These hatchlings could not protect themselves because they were stolen from their nest. A nest we entrusted to guards who failed their duty. This is a Drax shame, not something that concerns you. It concerns me because I'm the one who found them dying in a cargo container. Where were you? Starwing's eyes narrowed dangerously. You go too far, human. You went too far first. You let someone steal 6 babies and ship them across space to die. Don't lecture me about responsibility. The bay had gone deathly quiet. Vin looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. The judges watched with expressions of horror and fascination. And the hatchlings stared up at Dennis with something like awe. Starwing drew herself to full height, her wings spreading slightly in a display of dominance. You are bold for such a small creature. Bold and foolish. Stand aside and let us reclaim what is ours. No. We will take them by force if necessary. Then you'll have to go through me. The Drax matriarch studied him with ancient eyes. You would fight me? You would die for these hatchlings? In a heartbeat. Starwing tilted her head, and something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but curiosity. Why? Because they're my children. Because I promised to protect them. Because that's what fathers do. Fathers. The blue-scale Drax stepped forward. We have no such concept. Drax young are raised communally. Individual attachment is considered weakness. Grace, who had been silent until now, suddenly moved. She stepped away from Dennis and walked toward the massive adults, her small body shaking but her head held high. Then your way is wrong. Starwing looked down at her. You dare criticize your own people. Hatchling, I am Grace. These are my siblings, Patch, Spinner, Bright, Whisper, and Tumble. We were stolen from our nest. We were put in darkness and cold. We were starving and dying. Her voice grew stronger. Where were you? Where was our community? Where was the great Drax protection? The 3 adults said nothing. Grace continued. This human found us. He didn't know what we needed. He didn't know if we would live. But he tried anyway. He stayed awake for days. He made food from guesses. He kept us warm with machines he built from spare parts. She turned to look at Dennis. He gave us names. He told us stories. He taught us that being strong means being gentle. That being fierce means protecting those weaker than yourself. Patch joined her, then Spinner. Then all 6 hatchlings stood in a line between Dennis and the matriarchs. Bright spoke next. You say individual attachment is weakness. But our bond with Dennis made us strong. Strong enough to survive. Strong enough to stand before you now and say you're wrong. Whisper, the quietest one, added, we learned your language from station broadcasts. We learned about Drax culture, about the communal nests and distant parents, about hatchlings raised by everyone and no one. We don't want that, Tumble said firmly. We want our father. They finished together, Starwing's scales rippled with colors Dennis couldn't identify. The other 2 matriarchs had gone completely still. Finally, the blue-scaled one spoke quietly. They refuse us, their own kind, in favor of an alien. Not an alien, Grace corrected. Our father. Starwing closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, something had changed. You speak with conviction, young ones. But you are still children. You do not understand the complexity of what you demand. We understand love, Spinner said simply. Dennis taught us. Love. Starwing seemed to taste the word. Drax abandoned that concept generations ago. We believed it made us vulnerable. Made us weak. She looked at Dennis. You, human. You would bind yourself to 6 Drax for their entire lives? Their natural span is 300 of your years. You will age and die while they are still young by our standards. Dennis hadn't thought about that. The reality hit him like a physical blow. But he looked at his children and knew his answer. Then I'll give them everything I have while I'm here. And hope that's enough. Starwing studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then she lowered her massive head until she was at eye level with Dennis. I will test you, Dennis Clark. 3 trials to prove you are worthy to raise Drax young. If you succeed, we will acknowledge your claim before the entire Galactic Council. If you fail, the hatchlings return with us and you never see them again. What kind of trials? Trials of strength, wisdom, and heart. The three pillars of Dravik's parenthood. Her eyes glittered. Do you accept? Dennis looked at the hatchlings. They were terrified, but trying to be brave. 6 small faces that trusted him completely. He thought about his daughter, about the hole her death had left, about fixing broken toys in a desperate attempt to make the universe a little less shattered. And he thought about 6 new lives that needed him. 6 chances to be the father he hadn't been able to be before. I accept. The cargo bay had been transformed into a trial ground. Thousands of station residents packed the observation areas, and dozens of ships had arrived from nearby systems to witness the impossible. A human fighting for the right to raise Dravik's young. Dennis stood in the center of the bay with the 6 hatchlings pressed against his legs. Starwing and the other 2 matriarchs occupied a raised platform that station engineers had constructed overnight. The 3 judges from the original hearing sat nearby. Looking both nervous and fascinated, Starwing's voice carried across the entire space. The first trial is strength. Show us you have the power to protect Dravik's young from harm. A section of the bay floor opened and a massive object rose from below. It was a piece of Dravik's craftsmanship, beautiful and clearly ancient. The artifact stood taller than Dennis, made of crystal and metal fused in ways that seemed impossible. But it was shattered, broken into dozens of pieces that barely held together. This is the heart of mountains, a relic from our homeworld, Starwing explained. It was damaged during the war that led to our quarantine. For 200 years, we have sought someone with the strength to repair it. Many have tried. All have failed. The blue-scaled matriarch added, "You have 4 hours. If you cannot restore it, you fail the first trial." Dennis approached the artifact carefully. Up close, he could see the damage was extensive. The crystal pieces had fractured along stress lines that suggested explosive force. The metal framework had warped from extreme heat, and the whole thing was held together by some kind of energy field that flickered and sparked. He had repaired countless objects in his workshop, but never anything like this. Grace whispered, "You can do it. You fix impossible things." Dennis studied the artifact from every angle, his mind racing through possibilities. The crowd grew restless as minutes ticked by. Finally, he spoke. "I need tools, and I need the hatchlings to help me." Starwing tilted her head. "The hatchlings are not on trial." "No, but they're part of my strength. That's what you don't understand about humans. Our strength isn't just individual. It's in how we work together, how we lift each other up." The matriarch considered this, then nodded. "Proceed." Dennis sent Patch to his workshop to retrieve his toolkit. He had Bright and Spinner carefully map the fracture patterns in the crystal. Tumble and Whisper documented the metal warping with the scanner Dr. Shun had lent them. Gray stayed by his side, helping him think through the problem. "The energy field is holding the wrong pieces together," Dennis muttered. "It's trying to restore the original shape, but using the damaged framework as a template. That's why everyone failed. They tried to fix it while it was assembled, so we take it apart." Grace asked, "We take it apart." Working together, human and hatchlings carefully deactivated sections of the energy field. The artifact began to separate into its component pieces. The crowd gasped, thinking Dennis had just destroyed their last hope of repair. Even the matriarchs shifted uneasily, but Dennis knew broken things. He understood that sometimes you had to take something completely apart to see how it truly fit together. With the hatchling's help, he laid out every piece in precise order. Then he began working on the metal framework, using techniques he had learned repairing everything from data pads to ship components. Heat, pressure, patience. The warped metal slowly returned to its original form. The crystal was harder. It required a delicate touch and an understanding of how stress fractures propagated. Dennis worked for 3 hours, his hands cramping, sweat dripping into his eyes. The hatchlings brought him water and food. They encouraged him when his hands shook from exhaustion. With 20 minutes left, he began reassembling the artifact. Each piece clicked into place with a satisfaction that made his heart sing. This was what he was meant for. Not destroying, not conquering. Building, repairing, making broken things whole. The final piece slid home with 5 minutes to spare. The energy field reactivated, but this time it flowed smoothly through the restored channels. The heart of mountains blazed to life, light cascading through the crystal in patterns that made the crowd gasp in wonder. Starwing descended from her platform and examined the artifact closely. Impossible. You've done what our finest artisans could not. I had help, Dennis said, gesturing to the hatchlings. That's what strength really means. Not doing it alone, doing it together. The blue-scaled matriarch spoke. The first trial is past. The second trial is wisdom. Answer this question. What defines a family? Dennis wiped his hands on his shirt, buying time to think. This was a philosophical trap. Whatever answer he gave could be turned against him. But then he looked at the 6 hatchlings and realized the answer was simple. Family is who you choose to protect, who you choose to stay for, who you choose to love even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when the entire galaxy tells you you're wrong. He met Starwing's eyes. You ask what defines family like it's a question with one answer. But every species, every culture, every individual gets to decide that for themselves. And your definition, these 6, right here, that's my family. Not because they're human, not because they're easy, but because when they asked me to be their father, I said yes. And I meant it. The dark-scaled matriarch stepped forward. You speak of choice, but Dravik's young need the wisdom of many adults. How can one individual, especially an alien individual, provide adequate guidance? I can't. Not alone. That's why I'll find teachers, mentors, friends from a dozen species. I'll make sure they know their own culture, their own history. But at the end of every day, they'll come home to someone who loves them unconditionally, to someone who sees them not as dangerous fauna or political complications, but as children who deserve safety and happiness. Whisper spoke up quietly. He tells us stories about Earth, about humans, but he also found broadcasts about Dravik's history and culture. He makes sure we know where we come from, even though it's hard for him, Bright added. Even though learning about our people means accepting we'll outlive him by centuries. Starwing's scales rippled. You teach them about inevitable loss, about the grief they will face when you die. I teach them that love is worth the pain, that caring for someone, even knowing you'll lose them, is the bravest thing anyone can do. Dennis's voice cracked slightly. I learned that from my daughter. I just wish I'd learned it before I lost her. The 3 matriarchs conferred in their own language, their voices like wind through crystal. Finally, Starwing turned back. The second trial is past. Your wisdom may be imperfect, but it is honest. That is more than many can claim. She spread her wings fully, the display both beautiful and intimidating. The final trial is heart. Prove the depth of your bond with the young ones. The bay lights dimmed. 6 individual chambers rose from the floor, each containing 1 hatchling. Barriers of energy sealed them in separate spaces. Dennis's heart clenched. What are you doing? We have separated you from the hatchlings. If your bond is true, if your love is real, it will transcend physical distance. Dravik's parents share a telepathic link with their young. If you have truly become their father, that link will form now. Dennis pressed against the nearest barrier, seeing Grace's frightened face inside. I'm human. I don't have telepathy. Then you will fail. In their separate chambers, the hatchlings began to cry, not with voices, but with something deeper. Dennis felt it like a knife to his chest, a wordless plea for comfort and safety. He closed his eyes, trying to reach them somehow, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he heard them. Not words exactly, but feelings. Fear, loneliness, the desperate need for reassurance. Without thinking, Dennis reached back with everything he had. Not with his mind, but with his heart. With every ounce of love and protection and fierce determination that had carried him through 3 weeks of sleepless nights caring for dying hatchlings. With the same feeling he had carried for his daughter, transformed and redirected toward these 6 new lives. The connection formed like a circuit completing. Suddenly, Dennis could feel all 6 of them, their emotions as clear as if they were pressed against him. And they could feel him back, his steadiness, his love, his absolute refusal to let them go. The barriers dropped. The hatchlings rushed to him, and Dennis caught them all, 6 small bodies clinging to him while tears ran down his face. Starwing stood in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice held something Dennis had never expected to hear from her: wonder. You have formed the parent bond. A human, with no natural telepathic ability, has connected with Dravik's young through pure force of will and love. She lowered her head in a gesture that might have been respect. In 300 years of life, I have never seen this. Our own kind cannot form such bonds without years of proximity. You did in weeks. The blue-scaled matriarch added, perhaps we abandoned something precious when we abandoned individual parenthood. This human has shown us what we lost. Starwing addressed the crowd. Dennis Clark has passed all 3 trials. By Dravik's law and custom, he is acknowledged as parent to these 6 young. Any who dispute this will answer to the Burning Heights clan. The cargo bay erupted in noise. Some cheered, some argued, but none could deny what they had witnessed. The 3 judges conferred quickly, then the head judge stood. The Galactic Council will formally recognize this guardianship. Precedent has been set. The case is closed. Dennis barely heard them. He was too busy holding his children, feeling their relief and joy through the bond that now connected them. Grace pressed her head against his chest. We knew you could do it. I wasn't sure I could. We were, all 6 said together. In the weeks that followed, Dennis's repair shop became something more. A home. The hatchlings grew stronger and more confident. They learned from Dennis and from the various species on the station who volunteered to teach them. The Quillen merchant taught them mathematics. Dr. Shun taught them xenobiology. A Quarian engineer taught them ship mechanics. And Dennis taught them what he knew best, that broken things could be fixed. That love was worth fighting for. That family was something you chose and protected with everything you had. Other species began bringing him not just broken toys, but broken families. People who needed help bridging differences, understanding each other, finding common ground. The human who had defied a galaxy for 6 small lives became known as someone who could fix problems no one else could solve. One evening, Dennis sat in his workshop with 6 young dragons playing around him. Patch was helping repair a music player. Spinner was practicing her reading. Bright was taking apart a communicator just to see how it worked. Tumble was attempting to stack blocks without falling over. Grace was sketching designs for a new toy. And Whisper sat quietly beside Dennis, simply content to be close that a customer entered with a broken doll. Dennis examined it, already seeing how to fix the torn fabric and replace the missing eye. How much? The customer asked. Dennis smiled. For a kid's toy? Nothing. Never charge for these. Why not? He looked at his 6 children, his impossible family, his proof that love could cross any boundary the universe tried to impose. Because kids should never have to go without something that makes them happy. The mechanical bird on his shelf, the one Patch had helped repair, began to sing its gentle song. And Dennis Clark, the human who fixed broken things, understood that he had finally repaired the most important thing of all: himself.